The sea had gone to glass, and when the wind breathed across it, the whole bay sang like a rhymed bell. He lay with his cheek against the shore stones and did not feel them. There was a feather of black gull down stuck to his lip, and he did not feel that either. It rose and fell with the breath that did not steam, with a heart that did not pound. The sky was clear, cruelly bright, not a cloud to hold the light in place. Everything was clearer than it had ever been, edges cut sharp enough to bleed. When he opened his eyes, they were already open. He had to remember to blink, and when he did, frost broke from the lashes in tiny cracklings and fell upon his cheek and did not melt. Hardhome stood behind him, the black teeth of it jutting from the hills. The old huts and sheds were ashen ice, and the snow that had drifted through the ruined palisade was striped with the shadow of the broken timbers like bars in a jail. Out beyond, the frozen sea. Closer, the litter of bodies along the shore, men and women and children tangled in kelp, in nets, in each other. Their mouths were full of salt sand and their hands were curled like winter leaves. He looked at them and the world looked back. Eyes glimmering cold through lids the color of old bruises, heads turning as one might turn to a voice. He sat up. Something within him did not move at all. Something stilled and perfect remained as it was, a calm too complete to be named peace. His hand found Longclaw by habit. There was blood along the fuller, a brown-black scabbed line fretted white where spray had frozen it, and his glove left no stain. The wolf's head pommel was rimed, its eyes opal pale. His gloves were torn. He could see where cloth had vellumed to the meat. He flexed his fingers. They obeyed, but the ache of cold, the sting, the prickling pain of it gone. The finger that had once been broken made the same sound as a twig under snow. His breath did not smoke. The others did not either. They rose. He did not order it. He did not think the thought I command. They only rose because the world had been told, and so it obeyed. The sound of bones grinding, of wet cloth slapping, of ice loosening its bite from hair and beard and lashes, made a hush like prayer. Some came up on all fours before they found their feet. Some were missing hands or faces or the back of a skull. One tall raider with a bronze torque around his neck came up grinning because he had nothing left from the nose down. The grin was his skull. A girl whose hair had been copper in life rose with strings of weed draped like ribbons. A boy of no more than 4 swayed as though the wind alone moved him, his blue eyes bright as 2 bits of broken sky. The sea made a sound behind them like cloth tearing. The sun was very clean. He rose among them. The old habit of a commander came to him. He straightened, the cloak on his shoulders stiff as bark where the spray had taken it, and turned toward the place where the cliffs bit the shore and made a natural stair. The slope was shingled with frozen scree. Beyond it, a hill. Beyond that, the ranks of trees made a palisade of their own, dark spires against the blue. On the height, untouched by wind or salt spray, stood 4 figures bone slim and bright with that exhalation that was not light. Their eyes were bluer than winter. They were beautiful in the way of knives. He knew knives. He knew the weight of them in the hand. He knew when a man had a knife and meant to use it, and when a man had a knife and would rather not. He looked up at the figures and knew they knew him. One of them tilted his head in the manner of a raven that has seen something strange. Silent were their mouths. Their voices were the cold itself moving over the earth. Behind their stillness, something older watched through them, as a castle's window in the wall watches snow. The world had turned a page and found this written upon it long ago. He took a step. 100 bodies took a step, and the sound was a hush like the sea under ice. He lifted his hand without thinking, and the dead halted because his hand did. They were as quiet as rabbits in a snare. His glove brushed the wolf's head. The iron pommel was not iron, not truly. Valyrian steel was older than iron, different in the way a song is different from noise. In life, it had sung to his hand. It sang still, but the song came diminished, as if heard through snow. When he drew the blade, the frost on it shrank from the edge, a lip of rhyme lifting and curling as if burned. The sound the sword made was familiar. It should have warmed him. It did not. He spoke. The words were too heavy. The air took them and laid them down, and they froze where they fell. "Stop!" They had already stopped. He was telling the sea not to drown men. He was telling winter not to have teeth. He looked at his hand hanging there in the still air like something pinned in a glass. He lowered it. The four upon the height did not come down, but they turned together and began to move along the ridge, their steps easy, the snow under them sliding toward their feet rather than resisting. They did not look back. It was a summons and not an invitation. He was to follow or not. The choice was his. All choices were his, he understood, and none of them were. The dead men by the shore looked to him. The boy with the blue eyes stared at him with a slavish adoration he had seen only once, in a pup. He thought of Ghost. Ghost. The name was the sound of snow falling from a branch. Ghost was somewhere inland, where the trees were, where scents collected and were held by needles and bark. The bond between them had been a hawser once. Now it was a thread drawn through a bead of ice. When he tugged at it, the ice cracked a little. He felt, briefly, the taste of iron on a wolf's tongue, the itch of frost in the pads, the pull of a torn ear. He felt a scent like hot blood poured into snow. He felt fear not his. The thread dimmed again. He did not let G. Oh, he could not strengthen it either. Ghost was alive, and he was not. There are words between things that cannot be crossed, spells stronger than love. The old live with the old. The dead obey the dead. He lifted his hand again, not to command, but to steady himself upon that idea. The dead watched him as a child watches an elder for permission to breathe. He lowered the hand slowly, and they did not fall into any ravage. They continued to be patient as driftwood. The tide that had driven them to the shore would not pull them out again unless he wished it. A gull wheeled overhead and laughed, rough and bright as salt. He looked at it and thought, not yet. It went about its business, bored. He looked, then, beyond the bodies, beyond the jut of the palisade, beyond the black mouth where in life he had shepherded the free folk down to boats. The water had frozen itself into sheets that moved under one another with a slow shuttling motion, a loom working at a cloak for the earth. Far out, a line darker than the rest betrayed thinner ice. In that dark he thought he saw something shift, large and slow, a whale under glass. The sun bled itself upon every bright thing and made nothing warmer. He walked. When he walked, they walked. He climbed the slope where his feet found purchase, and so did they. A woman who had died with a hatchet buried in her shoulder hove her bulk up the slope with the quiet concentration of a smith at his work. The boy followed in her shadow, empty hands reaching only when it was easy. In life they had groaned and panted and cursed old gods and new. Now they went like a fasting pilgrimage already arrived. On the height, the four paused and turned, and he saw that one of them was more adorned than the others. The ice upon him had grown into lambent thorns at shoulder and brow, and a lattice of fine lines traced his cheekbones as if frost had chosen to write there and would not let go. Where a sword hung at his hip, the blade was clear as glass, and the light bent in it like water. The one with the thorns lifted one hand. It was a gesture without impatience or triumph. The gesture of a host when a guest arrives exactly as bidden. He came within arm's length and stopped because it pleased him to stop, not because the other wished it. He found he could distinguish between what he wanted and what the world wanted and whether they were the same. He looked into that blue and saw nothing human at all. He saw stars seen from beneath a sheet of river ice, and a deer whose breath turns to crystals in her nostrils and the crystals do not melt. He saw a black burrow under the roots of a weirwood where something sleeps like memory. He had been a man of oaths. He had broken them and kept them and wished, often, that words could be unspoken when the world refused to be neat and obedient. He did not kneel. He did not bare his head. He stood as a commander stands before an equal. The other lifted his hand farther and laid the tips of his fingers against John's breastbone. They were surprisingly gentle. Where they touched, cold flowed into him in a clean, hard line, and for a moment he could have wept, if that had been a thing he did any longer, because the cold was an answer to a question he had not known he was asking. It filled in the missing parts. It made of him a finished thing, terrible in the way a completed wall is terrible, or a sword when it is quenched. He had thought death would be an absence. This was a fullness. When the hand lifted away, there was frost in the impression of the 5 fingers, as if someone had painted a handprint upon the breast of his leathers. The 5 points burned inward, not with heat but with an attention that could not be evaded. He came away with the knowledge that he could take hold of that attention and turn it, that they did not mind if he did, that this was why he existed. He turned to the dead who had followed. The boy had tripped upon a stone and risen again without looking to see what had snagged him. The tall raider's bronze torque had frozen to the meat of his neck and made a dusty ring of frost flakes upon his chest where it chafed. The woman with the hatchet could not swing her good arm and did not seem to want to. He looked down the slope to the beach where others had not yet found their feet. He could taste the mass of them the way a man of the watch tastes the air before a storm and knows it will come from the north. The dead were heavy. Guiding them would be like steering a river. He raised his hand again, made a fist, opened it. The movement was small. 2,000 bodies obeyed the idea he had not yet fully formed and gathered themselves into a shape. Lines, ranks. They stood in the snow with more dignity than most armies he had seen. He looked at the one with the thorns and wondered if he should feel shame that he did this without flinching, without vomiting, without prayer. Shame did not come. His stomach did not either. He remembered the smell of roast onions at Winterfell, and the memory was a story he told himself about a man who had had such a smell once. He tried a word again for his own sake. Wait! The sound was not the point. They waited. He looked past the 4 upon the ridge to the line of the forest. In that black line, a white gaze. The white moved and was gone. Ghost was there. Ghost had seen him. Ghost had not come. In another life, was it yesterday? Was it years ago? Ghost would have come without being called. Ghost had torn a man's throat out for touching his Jon. Ghost had slept with his head upon Jon's boots in the Lord Commander's chamber and sighed dog sighs at night when Jon rolled onto his side and curled against the cold. Ghost had lived at his heel like a second shadow. The thread between them now stroked and withdrew with each move of the white shape among the trees. Ghost did not know whether to run or charge and could not bring himself to do either. He did not call. He would not put that W.R. Ongness into the wolf. He took one step toward the trees. The thorns upon the other's brow chimed like glass when the wind moved. It was a very soft sound. The 4 followed him at a distance. The way snow follows a man in drifts, he does not feel falling. The dead went where he wished them to. He put them into the trees and felt the forest accommodate them, give them little paths, a way through. The birds flew because birds will, but they did not dart toward eyes. The rabbits ran. A fox watched them go by from the mouth of its den with a swivel of its ears, then slipped backward into the earth. Sensible. He put the dead into the ruins of Craster's Keep when dusk made violet spores of light among the trunks and the snow surrendered any sharpness it had, becoming a powder again. The palisade had gone to gray weeds and sticks, the stink long gone. Bones lay where men had left them, and where things had gnawed them afterward. There were skulls hung by sinew upon the eaves of the hut. Some had fallen and broken. He stood and looked. He thought of brothers with eyes too old for their faces, and girls that had never been allowed to be girls, and of offerings in the snow higher than a creature's knee. He thought of Gilly with the boy at her breast and the way she had looked at him as if he were already a ghost. He thought of Sam, who had done a brave thing in a place where bravery was not expected of him, and yet he had done it because he could not live with himself if he did not. The old knowledge of revulsion stirred in him, but it was the movement of a shadow when clouds go by. He could not reach it. The thing on his breast that was not heat and not cold pushed outward like a hand against a door, and the stirrings quieted. He sent a handful of dead to stand the perimeter out of habit. It pleased him to know where his edges were. He did not need sleep. There was a rhythm to night and day, unheard by breathless men but followed all the same. He sat upon a fallen log where the bark had sloughed off in long tongues like a snake's shed skin. Snow made whispering sounds in the trees, falling in veils, catching in the black lace river of branches, slipping, falling again. The 4 kept their distance. He knew that if he had wished, they would have stood at his shoulder like shadows cast by different light. He did not wish it. He would not have the cold kings confide to themselves in his ear. He was theirs and he was not. He had been of the Night's Watch once. He would be of no one's now. He tried to remember the vows. His tongue moved against the inhuman dryness of his mouth and found them, broken a little, words mislaid by blood and cold and fear and stubbornness. But there, night gathers, he whispered to the silence, and now my watch begins. The wind tasted those words and made glass of them. They lay on the snow like smith's shavings, hard little curls that did not melt, too cold for a hand to pick up. He stood when it pleased him. He went to the skulls and looked up at them and thought of the thing made of their making. The blue-eyed boys taken into the trees and given back to the cold shaped into bone. That thought turned like a key in a lock. He looked to the four again. The thorn-crowned one regarded him with that same head tilt, that look of a raven when it has found a shiny stone. He reached up and touched the lowest skull. It had split across the brow and a spider had made a net in it. The spider was long dead. The net was a scaffolding of dust. Not yours, he said. It was the first act of defiance that felt like defiance. The cold at his breast swelled, not in pain, but in a recognition, as a river will swell when a stone rolls into it. The four did not answer because they did not have answers. They only had the thing beyond answers, the patience of glaciers, which will outweigh any argument and any king. One of them moved a step, the blade at his side whispering against its scabbard. John looked at that blade and then at Longclaw and could not tell which was older. One cut men, one cut time. He looked up again at the skulls. They creaked in the wind, soft as an old man's joints. He moved them. He did it gently, one after the other, lifting their old frayed strings off pegs and laying the skulls upon the snow. There were 22 skulls in all. He counted not because counting soothed him, but because the number mattered. It was not an even number. Some had fallen before and been taken by beasts. He laid them in a line in the snow all the same, and when he finished he looked at the line and thought, "It is wrong to string your dead as chimes. We string bells, and bells are for warning and joy, not for the rattling of bones." He stood there until dawn turned the far trees copper, and a raven landed upon one of the skulls and issued a harsh croak. He raised his head and the bird cocked its own, as if listening. For a moment he thought he saw intelligence in its pale eye, not just the cold bright quickness of an animal. He thought he saw a boy, not his boy, not Sam, not Gren, some other, a rascal in the godswood whose hands always smelled of sap. He blinked. The raven stabbed its beak into the hole where an eye appends a gaze and came away with nothing. It said a word. Snow. His name was a thing made of breath and memory. The bird had both. John looked at the raven and wished to call it. He did not. The bird hopped, flapped once, and was gone, black against the dark boughs. He watched it until it became the forest again. When the sun had risen far enough to make all colors fainter rather than brighter, winter's trick, he turned the ranks of the dead south. The four upon the ridge walked along quite near now, not at his shoulder, not far. The one with the thorns lifted their gaze toward the south, where the sky was less hard and the horizon a different shade. The wall lay there. He knew it as surely as he knew where the scar ran across his hip beneath his leathers, as surely as he knew the feel of a stone under bare foot in the shallows of the lake at Winterfell when he had been small. The wall was not a thing of ice only. It was song. He could feel it singing already, very faint, as a low tremor in the bones, the way a horse knows thunder before men do. They marched as men march when they have nowhere to be and no time by which to be there, which is to say perfectly. He could have gone on like that for a year and the soles of his feet would not have worn down. He was a thing that would not end unless ended. The day lengthened and then shortened without his leave. The day thinned. Animals went about their lives as they will. He saw a white hair vanish into the drift like a piece of lost sky. He saw tracks that were not his dead's, big round prints like cups, with a drag between them where a belly had lain heavy. He thought, bears sleep now. He thought, if I wished it I could pull a bear from its hole and make it stand and shamble behind me until it broke apart like rotted rope. He did not wish it. They camped in a sense that camp has meaning for those who do not sleep. He put them in a way that would be comfortable for men, and so it was comfortable for him. With nothing to do, they stood. With nothing to feel, they did not. In between the ranks, the snow fell and rose in mounds around shin and knee, and he let it. It buried their boots in softness. They did not stiffen. Snow was as far from pain as from pleasure. It was merely there. In the night, if we say night where sun is simply less, Ghost came. Jon had not called him. The wolf came ghosting between the trunks as if the trees themselves had made a shape that moved and was white. He stepped between two dead men who did not turn their heads to watch or sniff or even hear. He stood 30 paces from Jon and stared at him. The one with thorns turned his head toward the wolf, not with interest but with a gaze that said, "There is a thing which also moves, which also breathes." He did not take a step to the wolf. He did not need to. The cold believed itself already the king of all things that can be still. Jon raised his hand to hold the dead a little, to give the wolf room to make his choice. "Ghost," he said. The wolf bared his teeth. White teeth in white fur in white air, it was the idea of teeth. Jon tried to step toward him and stopped because Ghost flinched. The wolf's nose wrinkled. He made a sound that was almost a whine but began as a growl, confused. He remembered Jon from the iron and bitter milk of childhood, from the long damp smell of the wall cells, from the taste of chicken bones and leather and stew and other dogs and blood. He did not know this other smell, the empty smell, the smell of a thing not being smelled because it did not give anything to the air. Ghost's ears went back flat. He looked very large and very small. "Go," Jon said. It was a mercy in the old way. "Go, boy. Hunt. Keep to the woods. Don't let the dead touch you. Go on." Ghost took a step backward, then another, then turned and flowed away, all of him moving at once, the way water chooses the easy path and never looks back. The thread between them did not snap. It simply lay along the ground, slack and thin, and if you did not know it for what it was you would have thought it a hair caught upon a low torn branch. Jon did not watch him long. He did not have to look to know where he went. He had known the patterns of the wolf's wanderings when the wolf had been a pup. He knew them still. The wolf would hunt ptarmigan now. The wolf would find the rock with the heat of sun still in it and lie upon it at noon. The wolf would avoid the smell of the others because wolves are not fools. "Stark," said a voice like the whisper a frozen river makes when it shifts. It was not the thorn-crowned one. Another had spoken, or what passed for speaking. Jon turned his head and the other looked at him with a curiosity that had no warmth in it but asked all the same. "How?" He did not answer. He could have said, "I remember my name." He could have said, "I did not want what you gave me, but now that I have it I will use it as I used my life, which is to say badly and with honor mixed in, and I do not know which will fall from my hand last." He could have said, "Am I your king or your servant?" But he would not give them those words, would not make of himself a boy again asking at a hall full of grown men where to sit. He set them moving again at dawn, and when they came to open ground he saw them. Stones. A ring half fallen, black where the snow had blown away and white where it had clung. The place had a feeling like a breath drawn and held. The hair along the nape of a neck would have lifted if he had been such a thing as hair. He went to the stones and found what he had expected. A mound, nothing more to a stranger's eye, the weighted heave of earth that says men have put work into it, their work of love and fear. He stood at the mound's low side and set his palm against it. He could have pushed and the earth would have opened. He did not. He looked at the stones and the mold of snow along their shoulders, and he remembered a different barrow far to the south, under the heart tree at Winterfell. He could see the passage of those who had been in and out. He could see the place where the offerings lay, little things of tin and bone, iron knives with no handles, a child's toy hammered out of a copper coin. He could see where the snow had melted once around a candle cup. He could smell none of it. He reached and felt the bones beneath and understood them the way a man understands the grain of wood, immediately, without words, by the hand. Here were men of the first men. Here were women who had ground barley at the door of a hall and had their ashes mixed with the dogs. Here were boys who had died of fevers with their mother's hands in theirs. Here were spears. Here was a woven belt with antlers too small to call a stag. Here was time. He see. Uld take them. He could make of their long patient sleep an army without voice or memory. The thought came. He held it. He did not do it. He would not rob sleep where he could help it. The dead who marched already had been stolen in horror and hurry. These had been placed with care, and the care was a spell as strong as any the children had sung into the wall. A smaller, homelier spell, but a spell for all that. He stepped back and left the earth to its keeping. He did not say, "This is mercy." He only walked away with the snow making a small hiss under his boots where it was coldest. They came within sight of the wall 4 days later. He felt it before he saw it. The dead came up out of the trees and down a long slope where the wind had scoured the ground to the old hard crust of a storm months gone. The slope broke into a little valley, and then the trees fell away as if cut by a cartographer's quill, and the world ended. The sky was the sky and the ground was the ground, and between them was a blue-white presence that ate both. The wall did not look like a thing made. It looked like a river frozen while it fell. A flood caught in the act of destroying and asked to stay that way forever. The song of it ran into him. It came through the 5-pointed mark upon his chest like a nail driven into a board and bent over on the far side. The song said no. The song said keep. The song said here and there, and it was not a song he could sing. He went closer, and each step was harder than the one before, as if he were walking into wind that had weight. When he could not take another step forward without leaving his feet behind, he stopped. His breath did not smoke. The wall made its own smoke, a fine bright frost spark that hung in the air near it like dust motes in a shaft of sun. He came as close as he could and looked up until the sky spun and the wall seemed to bend over him and the world became a bowl with him at the bottom. A hairline crack ran from a place high up like the hairline crack in a goblet. It caught the pale light and sent it sideways. He reached out his hand and felt the air resist it, a pressure that pressed back with a softer hand than the others but stronger because it did not care if it broke him. He put his palm flat. The cold leapt up his arm like a dog to a master who has come home. It should have ravaged him. It welcomed him and warned him both, the way a mother might hold a knife where a child can see it. The skin of his palm broke and crystals grew in the cut faster than blood ever would have welled. Frost flowered in the whirls of his print. The wall's song did not falter. His hand left a white mark when he lifted it away, and the mark shrank and vanished into the larger brightness. He heard, far and small, men on top. Their voices were gnats in a vast afternoon. A bell clanged, one lonely note, thin with cold. He took 2 steps backward and stopped, feeling the push upon him. With the push gone, the mark upon his chest cooled as if the 5 fingers had been removed from an ember. He turned and looked at the dead ranged behind him, a plurality of statues, white air slipping around them. He looked at the 4 at his back. The thorn-crowned other regarded him with the same calm that had watched men drown and a mother scream upon the shore at Hardhome. He could read nothing there. He did not know if they hoped or feared he would find a way through. He did not need to know. He found that this not knowing troubled him less than it would have once. The wall said no. The sea had said come. He looked east along the line of the wall, where it dwindled into haze. There was a place where the ice met the water. There were castles, Eastwatch with its boats and bells, and far beyond, places with names that lived only in old mouths. Places the small folk spoke of to frighten children to sleep. The sea made a habit of breaking things. He would have to see where its habit could be turned to his use. He lingered because there was a habit in him too of wanting. He had come north as a boy because he wanted elsewhere more than the place where he slept, wanted a cloak and a vow and a name that worked like a wall around a room. He had made decisions and been made by them. He stood before the wall and wanted now to climb it again and stand upon the high ice and look out over the edge of the world and hear nothing but wind and the creak of impossibilities. The dead do not sigh. He still felt the thing that would have been one move through his chest like wariness through a horse. Ghost, he said, though the wolf was not there. The name made his mouth shape old shapes. Something moved upon the wall above. Little figures. A man in black put his hands to his mouth and shouted, and his words fell to the ground like stones and did not break. John could not hear them. He could see the way the man's stance changed after he had shouted, the way he took pride in having shouted, the way his chin lifted because his duty had been done by shouting. He remembered that stance. He remembered being the boy who would have shouldered 2 others aside to get to the bell rope. He did not wave. "Lord Commander!" someone cried from above. A very small voice in a very small mouth, fat with hope, stung him that it was the only sting that got through. He turned away, not because he could not bear it, but because he would not. He did not want them to use that name for him. He had been that man. He was not now. Names are spells also. Not tonight, he said to the wall. Sang on, deaf. He took the army along the wall like a shadow at the feet of a great white tower. Men watched from above, little faces, little breath clouds, little gestures that meant fear. He could smell the lamp oil burning in their pans even though he did not smell. He imagined it. He could guess how often they would check the levels of oil, how often the men would piss, which would piss over the side to make yellow flowers in the snow and W. Hitch would be too fearful of ghosts and witches to do anything but into a bucket, which he would knock over when his hands began to shake. How long it would take Ed to come and right matters and put a hand on a throat and say enough in his soft voice that was quieter than the wind but carried farther. He left them their living concerns. They went east. The forest fell away to rock, and the rock to a salt stink, and the salt to a reach of ice that was neither land nor sea but the betweenness. And the betweenness was where things happen. The dead walked upon it, and their weight made no mark. The ice moaned sometimes, long and low. Seals lay upon the floes far out like rocks that had decided to breathe. One drowsed on and on as the dead went by and then suddenly woke, rolled like a drunkard, and slithered into a black slit with a slap that sent up a mist of frozen spittle. Gulls watched because gulls watch everything for a scrap of meat, and they could not tell a dead man's meat from any other. They came to the place where the wall thrust itself into the sea, and the sea pushed back as if affronted, and the two had reached an accommodation. Here a cave mouth, there a tumble into slush and shards. Here a span of ice thin as glass. There a ridge where the wind had scoured too hard. The thing that was not wind moved between crevices here. He stood upon a shelf of old ice where blue went to black and listened with something that was not ears. The wall sang. The sea sang also. Their songs were not so very different as men thought. He sent the dead east and west along the shingle. He sent them north a ways. He sent them between rocks. He sent them under where a long, low tunnel mouth grinned like a mouth with bad teeth, where the ice had fallen away and left old stone. He sent them into the sea where the water had crusted thinly and would not bear a living weight. The dead did not test it. He did. After 10 men had slipped silently into the black, he called them back. Not because they could not walk the sea's floor, but because it pleased him not to lose their shapes to the tremors and sucking of hidden channels. The 4 watched him work as a craftsman watches an apprentice plane aboard. With no praise and no discouragement, with the mild interest of those who have done this all before and have done it better. By full dark, which was to say by an accumulation of dusk that had got its own way at last. He had found 3 places that felt like keys and could not be turned. He contended with them in the way ice contends with stone, by pressure and time. They contended back by the old green words spoken into the making at the beginning and bound with blood. He stood, hand upon the ridge of one old joint, and thought of Bran, who had never been content to stand where he was put. He had been a small, lively thing, that boy, full of ladders. Had Bran been here, he could have put his hand upon the same place and heard words also, or perhaps he would have been devoured by them. The world is not kind to boys who think words can make it bend. He lifted his hand. He stepped away. He felt, distantly, what passed for tiredness in a thing that did not tire. A dilation behind the eyes, a wanting to lie down, not to rest but to choose a different shape for a time. He could indulge it or not. He did not. He looked east along the shore, saw a lean smear of black that meant open water beyond the crust, and thought. Boats. He thought. Rafts. He thought. The men at Eastwatch must look at their harbor every morning now with a heart like a spoiled pear, worried it will bruise if they breathe on it. He thought of oars black with tar. He thought of how it talks to men who have listened to it all their lives. He thought of storms. He thought of the gap. If he could not take the dead through the wall, he would take them around it. The thought was as simple as bread. He set men to finding timber. He set them to hauling. They needed no tools. Their hands were wedges. They were clumsy, but they were many. The sound of their work flew out over the sea and came back diminished, a ghost of a ghost. He pulled old nets from the ruins of sheds along the shore, nets stiff with old salt and old rot. and made of them a binding. The one with thorns watched with head cocked and did not lift a hand to help or hinder. The moon rose. It looked close enough to touch and cold enough to burn. He lifted his hand to it on a childish impulse and put the hand down again when he realized what he was doing. There were no childish impulses in him. There were only choices and necessities. He did not need to eat. He did not need to drink. He did not need a fire. He needed only to reach, to take, to move. He could have taken the quick way and flung the dead into the black water and let them go under and rise where the sea chose to give them back. Could have set 100, 1,000 to walk the ocean floor like a road and come up under Eastwatch like crabs. He did not. There was a kind of honor even in this. He would not send them blindly where he would not go. He had been a commander when it meant freezing and hunger and long lonely watches and the mouths of other men to keep from going mute with fear. He would be a commander now. He could not rest, but he could be still. He stood with the white humming thing in his chest, a lantern without light. He listened. He felt, far west along the wall, a plucking at that song as if someone had put a finger upon a harp string and made it wobble. He turned his head and knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with ears or eyes. A gate. A gate not shut properly. A place where what should have been one had become two, and the crack wanted company. He could walk there. The dead could come. He could press his hand into that place until the hand was the place and the place was his hand. Doors do not like pressure forever. Doors fail. His stillness did not move. He kept his eye on the work before him. The raft's tea. Oak shape, thick with hoar, smelling of old pitch. He laid the dead upon them and felt them adjust their weight. Not because they feared to fall, but because his wish had that kind of honesty to it that men will sometimes honor even when no one will punish them if they do not. He lashed them in with rotten rope that held, because rope that has already done its work once will do it again if asked. He sent the first raft forward to a living man, mortal dark. Slid, rocked, and found the path as water finds. He sent a second. He did not go on either. He was not leaving. He was extending himself. He was a man but also a weather. He could be in more than one place the way frost can. At dawn, the bells at Eastwatch began to ring. The bells were small. They sounded large. Fear makes a chasm for sound to cross and come to a man multiplied. He looked up from the lashings and saw men upon the sea wall moving like beads upon a string, shuttling back and forth, the shouts parching in the cold. Boats went into the water, black slivers. Their oars dipped and rose, and small fires sprang to life upon their decks. He could smell the pitch then. It stung his absent nostrils like nettles. He watched the boats swerve to hurt his rafts and his men. He watched arrows thud into dead breasts and remain there like accusations. He watched torches arc. He lifted his hand and felt the dead sink when he wished them to, their bodies sliding into the black without splash, the rafts bucking and trying to go on without them and then stopping when they were told to stop. He watched the boats go look for men who did not drown and find none and come about with that fear again in the set of their oars. He could follow this game a long time. Men could not. Oil burns out. He could have stormed the quays. He could have sent the dead to climb upon stone the way other men climb upon ladders. He did not. He stood in the whiteness and watched the small private courage of men who had not slept much and would not sleep soon, and would do their duty until their hands forget they were hands. He did not hate them. He did not want to see them die. There was no one in him that wore that face. He wanted only what the white thing in his chest wanted, and that was to gather and to keep and to move forward. He could have moved forward by crushing. He chose to move forward by slipping. When it was full day and the boats were tired, he sent the rafts again, and this time he sent them east of the watch and west of it and then under it. And the men on the quays went left and right as commanded by their own fear. He did not hurry. He did not slow. He felt the push of the wall spell and pressed like a winter with extra teeth. He did not break it. He did not even chip it. He began instead to find the places men had made and left. The little tunnels used to fetch ice for drinks by lords who wanted to pretend the winter was a luxury. The drains. The culverts you do not think of until you need them. The ways men cheat their own rules when no one is looking. He put dead into those roads. He did it with a care that surprised him and with an exactness that would have pleased a builder. He felt them wedge. He felt them unwedge. He felt them break and felt the pieces find new balance and float up to become ice for a gull to rest its webbed foot upon. He breathed, though he did not need to. A habit like the habit of a man who says a prayer before drawing and yet has drawn so often he no longer hears the words. Toward noon, a man on the wall above him lifted a horn. It was an old horn, a big one. The sound of it rolled out over the sea in a long house-deep bray. It said, "Come, men." And men came. He watched them. The black of their cloaks did not look black against the wall. The wall eats black. You could see an outline and then not. He watched them go to their stations. He watched a man slip and his fellow catch him. He watched another man look down and then look away quickly. He did not think, "You are cowards." He did not think, "You are brave." He thought, "You are men." "Stark," said the soft river voice again at his back. He looked around and saw that the other had not moved. The Thorn King had not moved either. They stood like the idea of winter made visible. If he had been a poet, he might have said many things and none would have been true. He only lifted his chin a little, an old boy's trick that said, "I hear you and I do not plead." The other looked at him a long time the way a hawk watches a movement under snow. There was no change to read in that face. These were not men. They were what men made themselves into when they had no weather and too much time. "Not yours," he said again to them, because he found there were things in him that had to be said twice to be fully his. He turned east. He sent the dead farther and farther around the horn of the watch. He sent them along the black ice where the sea's breath made little flowers of frost and then blew on them and took them away. He watched, and when he was satisfied, he turned all those thoughts that were not thoughts back to the crack he had felt along the wall westward and measured the day in strides. He would go there when the dark came. He would go there with the dead arranged in a pattern the way a man arranges stones in a river before he crosses, to step upon. He would test the door and the door would hold or it would not. Before he left, he sent a message. It was a useless thing, perhaps. It was a ghost of a kindness because the kindness that had animated it was itself a ghost. He took from his belt a bit of leather thong and, from his glove, a thing he had kept there since before Hardhome. A token, stupid, a small weirwood shaving cut from a branch when he had stood near the heart tree the last time as a living man, an old trick of boys. Take a piece, keep it and the tree will remember you, you will not lose your way. He had pressed it between finger and thumb. While a man bled out upon the snow in his arms, pressed it so hard the print would have been in it if it had been clay. He had forgotten it until his pocket had torn upon the shingle at Hardhome and the bit had slipped into his glove as any bit of trash might do. He had kept it because his fingers had known it and had not wanted to know themselves without it. He took it now and tied it to the broken end of an arrow, and he took the arrow and laid it in the hand of the boy with the blue eyes. "Carry," he said. The boy had not the strength to draw a bow. He had not strength enough to break a bird's neck. He had that other strength. He put an arrow into a dead hand and a dead foot went forward and another followed. He sent the boy along the shore. He sent him into sight of the men on the wall and of the men at the quays. He let them see the thing that hung from the arrow's broken notch. A bit of red and white, the red old, the white newer, the grain still reading like winter rings. He let a man of black take up a hand glass and put it to his eye and swear softly when he saw the bit for what it was. He let another man make the symbol he believed would call a god to the breach. He let the boy stand there long enough for the smell of lamp oil to cover the smell of salt and for the bells to ring once more and for someone to say, "What is that he's holding?" And for someone to answer, "A piece of a tree," and for that to mean nothing at all. He did not think it would be Sansa. He did not think it would be Sam. He did not think it would be Bran, who was far from walls. He did not think it would be anyone who had known his face. He sent it because he wanted to put a hand upon the world and say, "I remember you." And this was a hand he could spare. Night comes early along the coast. The east goes to iron and the west to lead. And the gray between is the only gift men get for their lamps and their good intentions. He sent the dead away from the quays as the bells rang for the watch and men boiled their little kettles and shivered in their boots and told their smutty jokes with the same mouths they had used for the horn. He left them to it. He went west. The crack he had felt along the wall was not where he would have chosen to make it. It was a place that had been forgotten. That was its strength and weakness both. The snow made of the land their little pillows like the ones in a chamber of a lord who could spend money on down. Between these humps of snow were hollows where the cold lay in like a pet. He walked between them with the dead in his wake, a river that did not have to bend for rocks. The wall sang its no in his bones. He sang his yes back with the weight of those behind him and what he had become. He came to the place the crack began and laid his hand to it, and the world shuddered a little, the way a horse does when a fly lands along his spine. He could have broken it then. He understood this the way a man understands how far it is to fall because he has done it once. He could find the right dead weight to wedge, the right pressure to apply, the right inadvertent human error to involve, and the door would become not door. He did not. He looked along the line of the wall to the south and thought of Winterfell again. Not as it had been when the snow covered the courtyards and he had run with the wolf and Arya had held up a stick and shouted at him that he was not fighting fair, but as it had been in his mind when dying. A place to go that was his and yet not. He thought of the warm smell of stone where fires have burned for weeks and weeks, and the smell does not go entirely out even in summer. He thought of his father's voice and the way it did not rise. He thought of Sansa's folded hands and the way they had unfolded eventually and held a cup of wine for him, and she had said very little. All of it weighed before she said it. He thought of Bran's hands on the bark of the weirwood. He thought of Rickon with hair always in his eyes. He thought, without intending to, of a girl with red hair who had died in a rain of Ygritte's white arrows and had said you know nothing and had kissed him with a mouth as warm as bread pulled from an oven. He thought of all of that, and then he took his hand from the wall and turned away from breaking the door. He would not break it until he had to. He would go around. He would be Winter's patience. He would teach the dead to be boats and the boats to be dead and the sea to be both. He would save his crack for the day the wall's no could not be answered softly. He wanted to be a king among monsters if he must be a monster. A king saves his strength. He went back to the rafts and found them as he had left them, because the dead do not innovate when not told to do so, and the four were as they had been because ice is not fond of invention. He put his hand to the lashings and retied what did not need tying. He sent 10 men into the black. He kept 20 upon the ice. He walked himself to the edge where light ended and put his foot upon the seam of dark. He went along the seam as a man goes along a hedge, keeping it to his right hand, not because the hedge blocks him, but because it pleases him to be thorough. He came to a place where the seam bent and then unbent. He thought of maps. He thought of Maester Aemon, whose eyes had been clouds and yet who had seen farther than any of them. He thought of Sam's round face intent upon letters, his fingers smudged, his lips moving. He thought of the words he had left on Sam's shoulders when he had climbed the stairs for the last time as a living man and had turned to see the place where he had been a boy and a commander both. He thought, Sam will read. He thought, Sam will tell someone. He almost smiled because he remembered, for a moment, the twitch of mouth that had meant humor. The sea breathed under the ice. He could feel it. It did not ask permission. It had never asked. It was a comfort that you could rely upon things to be themselves. He sent more men around the horn, then more. He moved in a long patience, a snow that does not melt in a north-facing hollow because the sun does not see it for months, and when it does at last its hands are weak. He did not need victory before sunset. He did not need victory by spring. Winter does not count those things. Winter counts only itself. He let the dead fall where the ice would hold them. He let them find the road under the black. He let them rise where the road ended. They rose in drips and drabs, embarrassingly, in ones and twos, in small collectings of 3 and 4, and the men of the watch moved to put them down again. This game could be played a long time. He played it a little longer until the men understood it was a game without end, and their own eyes took on the look he had seen on the shore at Hardhome when the sea had gone to glass and there had been no boats left. He felt no triumph then. He felt the same stillness as ever. He did not drive them into the knife. He did not rush them. He kept them in that old slow. He made of their coming a thinking thing that thought long thoughts. He wanted time to look upon the face of the world as he remade it and say, "Is this what I want?" He had not been offered that once. Now he took it because it was his to take. On the 5th night, Under a sky so clear the stars looked like chips hammered from glass, there came a girl to the shore. She was alive. She wore furs homeowners had worn before men bought things. They had been stitched and restitched by a hand that knew what it was doing. A blade hung at her hip and a child's hand held the hem of her cloak. The child had no blue eyes. He wept. The salt of it made his face a wet mirror in the starlight. The girl had freckles and a scar under the left eye that made her look like someone had once not liked her and she had not cared. She came because she had been sent or because she had chosen. He could not tell. She came straight toward him through the edges of his dead, the way one goes through a field of wheat, with respect and without dread. She stopped 3 paces from him and looked at his face. She was very brave. He respected bravery without admiration. He waited. She took a breath that steamed. "Maida says there was a man once called Snow," she said, and her voice had the clipped north in it, the ice that makes of words tools and not toys. "Maida says he wasn't the kind to hide. Maida says he's dead now, so it don't matter either way. But Maida says if he saw him and he was not dead no more but very wrong, Maida would ask him to remember there were children in this world as well as men, and to keep out of their bellies. Maida says to you." Her breath broke and made another ghost. She wiped her nose with the back of her glove in the old way of girls. The boy at her cloak hiccuped and took it back. He could not smile. He could recognize pleasure. He recognized it now. He looked at the girl, at the way she had come in a straight line through a crowded and silent doom to tell a dead man not to be a monster. He nodded once. A bow a king might give to an envoy who has had the insolence to come bareheaded to his hall and speak truth. "Your duh is smart," he said. It came out as a harsh grinding in air that hated to carry it. But it came. "He's a shit," she said promptly, which felt like home in a way the wall never had. He lifted his hands slightly and the dead in 100-yard circle around them took a step back, the way wheat will bend when wind goes through it and then stand again. He did not know why he did it. He only found that he did not want the boy to have blue eyes, and so he made it less likely for a while. "Go back," he said. "Tell your duh the dead will go around where they can." She looked at him for a long time as if to judge whether he lied. He did not lie. At last she nodded. "I'll tell him," she said. "I'll tell them, if they've aught to listen with." She turned. She walked away with the boy holding to her as if he would be torn loose by the wind if he did not. He watched them go, and the dead closed once more behind them like snow closing on a boot print. He did not turn to see the expression on any other's face. Expressions are for lives lived among hearths. He was a different thing. He kept the army to the shore and to the sea and to the cracks that men had put in the wall and filled up and left. He kept them from the free folk he could keep them from, and from the men in black he could keep them from when it did not hinder his road. He kept a kind of term made of nothing and binding only because he willed it. He did not know why he did this except that the wolf had looked at him and not come. Days fell like snow from a tree. He measured the time in new lashings, in how many of the rafts he had made had been lost and how many had come through with their cargo of absence intact, in which men above at Eastwatch had begun to move more slowly and which had learned to move quickly, in which birds had returned to sit upon the ends of things and cock their heads, nosing at this odd story with black beaks. He did not count nights in the old way. You cannot number a lack. He did count something else. The steadiness of the song behind the wall. He had felt where he could turn it and where not. He kept his hand upon it without pressing. He grew used to the weight of it in a way that a man grows used to the weight of a sword upon his hip. So used he only knew its absence when it was gone. He knew it would be gone someday. He did not know if he would be glad or not. He reached a point along the shoreline where the sea gates embraced a little bay men had once used to bring in goods. There was a grave there under a rock. The rock had been carved in a clumsy hand with a name that had been brave in a storm and foolish in peace. The name was not one he knew. He watched the wind clear it of snow. He stood there a while without knowing why. Tage. Dead stood as well. The four stood. The world turned. He had become used to the fact that sometimes nothing would happen and that this was itself an event. The thing that happened then was not the breaking of the wall. It was not the bending of men. It was not a cry from a raven or a girl coming because she must. It was a smell on a wind he could not smell and yet did. Smoke that was not pitch and was not lamp, smoke with sweet in it and iron and something older. The smell came before the sound and the sound came before the sight. A thudding like a great drum in the sky, then a rush like the underskirt of a storm, then the glare that turns snow to mirrors and men to shadows. He did not take a step backward when the great black shape cut the air as if the air were cloth. He did not lower his head when the thing screamed and fire licked its throat like honey. He watched it as his dead went from still to movement in a way that had nothing to do with his hand and everything to do with old fear. The dragon banked. The dragon's wings put a sound into the world men always remember in their marrow, even if they were not there to hear it. The girl upon its back was not a girl and not a queen. She was the idea of both. Her hair had light in it that the sky had not given her, and the wind worried it into ropes that slapped at her cheeks. She leaned upon a ridge of spine with her weight thrown as raiders throw to turn a boat. The dragon opened its mouth, and what came out was not what fire had been in the past. It was a cleaner fire, like the first word spoken after a long silence. The fire went toward the dead. He lifted his hand and the dead went out of its way, in ranks and lines, without hurry. The fire kissed the place where they had been and made the ice there run like tears. It kissed a raft, and the raft graduated from being a raft to being black sticks stabbing into a snow-white bank, and steam took the place of any song. The dragon's shadow went over him, and he was inside it for a moment with all the world further away. He thought, simple as bone, that this was not done because it would not be finished. He thought then that the girl upon the dragon's back had eyes he had seen in a looking glass, not because they were his but because they looked at the world with that same act of will that had served him when he had been king of nothing and commander of men. He lifted his face. He did not call out. Her name had been at his mouth once, often. His mouth was a grave now. He thought of things he had said to her and things he had not, and found, to his surprise, that he did not reach for any of them. The time for that had gone. Not because he was dead, but because living men only get so many chances to speak, and then even if you live 100 more years, you do not have those chances anymore. The dragon came around again. In the third pass, he felt it. The book spine of the wall's song flecks under the dragon's fire, not in pain, not broken, but altered. Fire listening to ice and ice listening back. He could have pressed then. He could have taken the moment when the song went slack and leaned. He did not. He did not because the picture in his mind of a boy below a hull of boats with a bit of weirwood tied to a shard of arrow had not gone from him. He did not because the wolf had looked at him and had not come. He did not because the girl with the freckles had told him a man in a hut had said a thing that mattered and she believed that it should matter, and he found that he agreed with her. He did not because he could not yet see far enough down the road of what would happen if ice and fire married here and now. He did not because he had learned at last, being dead, the one thing he had not learned living: how to wait. The dragon went away. The men stood on the wall and thought their work had done the work, because that is a thing men think, and it gets them through the night. The four at his shoulder offered him nothing. They were always offering him nothing, and he was always refusing it. He turned back to the long, slow road and the long, smooth sea. He shepherded the dead into the black a few at a time, and he held the song of the wall in his chest and found that its cold comforted him more than the dragon's fire had, and this did not surprise him. He had become what he had become. He would lead what he led. He would keep the old mercy as he could and break what he could not otherwise, bend and hold to a rule he made for himself because no one else would do it for him. He did not yet know whether in the end he would be the ruin or the salvation of the living. He did not think it was his to choose. He thought only of the next raft and the next lashings and the next crack, and the creature who had pressed 5 fingers to his chest and written upon him a command that read the same from any side: forward. When he slept, and sleep is what we call any stillness that lasts long enough to be noticed, he dreamed of the crypts beneath Winterfell. He walked between the stone kings with their stony swords and their stone wolves at their feet. He was not the first to walk there in a dream. He put his hand upon the stone knee of a man whose face had been worn by generations of little fingers until the features were strange, soft. He said no words. The stone did not answer. He heard a boy's steps running and knew them. He did not turn. He wanted that sound to go on and on. He let his dream make of the crypta road and of the road a branch in a tree and of the tree a white face watching. kindly as clouds. He frowned without knowing he did it, and the dead in the world gave their weight to one foot and then the other and shifted like pines at night under snow. The white thing in his chest hummed along with the wall's song, out of tune, then in, then out. He woke into the same day. He woke into a world in which the dead marched upon the sea and the living watched and decided what to do, and he watched them and decide what to do. And somewhere south of all of it, a girl with a crown and a dragon in her shadow lit another fire and made another man go to his knee. And somewhere farther still, a girl with a wooden sword held a boy's hand in a crowd and thought of knives. And somewhere in the world's root, a boy without legs touched old bark and made a choice he would not be forgiven for by any god. He woke and went on. Snow fell so softly the air looked woven. He let the dead carry that softness upon their shoulders like capes. He let their footsteps be the lattice that would hold up the next day. He set his face toward the east because the east had given him a path and because the west had given him a no, and he would honor both. He carried in his glove a bit of old carved wood like a secret you do not say aloud because saying it would put it within a spell. He carried upon his breast 5 white marks that would never fade and would never rot and would never be washed away by any river. He carried in himself a vow no man had asked him to make and no god had demanded. That if he must end the world, he would at least have looked it in the eye first. He walked at the head of his army, and the army walked because walking was what was in front of them. The way night is what is in front of day. The sun made a brief appearance and went away quickly as if ashamed for having tried. He made no such apology. He had been a Stark and a Snow and a brother and a lover and a king of nothing. He was now a thing that led other things, and he would be that thoroughly. The sea sang no song that a man would care to hum. The wall sang on. The rafts creaked. The dead stood up and lay down at a thought and rose and took another step because step after step after step is what makes anything happen, whether you are living or dead. Toward evening he saw, upon a far flow, a shape rising upright. It was a man. The man was made of old wood and lambskin and thyme. He held a staff in his hands. He wore no crown. He looked like a priest who had forgotten which god was his. The dead did not turn to him because the dead do not turn if not told. The man turned his face, and John saw that it was a face he had seen once reflected in the surface of a well when he had looked down to check if it was good water. He had seen it not in a face but in the way the water had refused to freeze no matter how many nights the frost had cut it. "Come," said the man. He spoke to the air because speaking to the dead is foolishness. He turned and began to walk across the ice without looking to see if the ice would take him. He walked in a straight line. He looked as if he had always been there. John watched him a long time and then lifted his hand, and the dead parted and made a road, and he followed the man because he had decided long ago he would rather walk toward a thing that would destroy him than wait for the thing to come. He had come to life that way once. He went to death that way now. The flow creaked. The staff of the man made no mark, not because it was snow but because it was idea. He did not look back. The white thing in John's chest made a shape that might have been recognition. The man came to the edge of a black crack, hopped it as one hops a gutter in the street, and made no fuss about it at all. John made the crack wider by standing near it and made it less by standing very still and looking with the corners of his eyes. He stepped and the water closed grayly behind his heel. It made no difference. The world goes on making its old noises. The dead fall silent where there is talking. He went forward. He did not yet know what the man would show him. He did not know if there was anything to be shown that he did not already know. He did know that the road into the future was a river under ice, and you could either stand upon it and turn blue at the edges and guard your own breath like a candle, or you could walk and crack it and drown, and maybe the breath you had husband would make a little flower of steam in air before you went under. He had made up his mind to walk. Behind him, the army waited for his hand. The 4 waited for his weight. The wall sang to something older than men. Ahead, the man with the staff knocked the edge of a flow with the end of it as if knocking upon a door to a cottage where you knew the woman within would not answer if she did not wish to. And the sound that came from that knock was very old and very deep and very patient. John thought, "I have heard that before." He did not know whether he would remember where by the time he came to the place where it mattered. He went on all the same because going on was the only thing left that did not make him a liar to himself.